All right. Hello, everyone. Bonjour. My name is Sarah Nelson, and I am the Universal Services Manager for the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. I am also a member of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa. However, I'm not in Michigan today. I am joining you from Las Vegas, Nevada. And today is part 3 of our data system webinar series. And so today we will be talking about contracting with data system vendors with our panelists, and our team has put this webinar together. And so as you're joining us, if you'd like to share your name, your title, and your organization in the chat, that'd be wonderful. Today we'll be talking very briefly about some housekeeping. I'll let you know who's on the call with us from our team. We'll have a few poll questions for you, and we are going to dive right into our topic of talking about contract considerations for data systems. And so we'll talk about what is contract language, what contract language should you be looking for, should you try to ensure is in your contract when you're thinking about identifying a data system, and what elements should be included in that contract. A few quick pieces of housekeeping today. There is a worksheet available for your reference, and we also have slides and the worksheet available in both PDF and a Word doc format. This is in case this may be helpful for you to bring back to your team, to be able to answer the questions yourself, or to take notes during today's webinar. So we encourage you to use these tools in whatever way is meaningful and helpful to you. Just a reminder, this is a Zoom webinar. What that means is in a Zoom webinar, our attendees can't see who is in the room. And so that's why I encourage, if you share your name in the chat, we know who's in the room with us today. And because this is a webinar, you are automatically muted. And so the chat is your best mode of communicating with us as the panelists. You can communicate directly with everybody who is on the call, or you can click a little button and change it to talk just to the host and panelists. If you're having a tech issue, if my sound is not working, if something happens, please feel free to let us know, and we will be happy to help you as quick as we can. This webinar is also being recorded today. We will share this on our Tribal Information Exchange website, tribalinformationexchange.org, after today's call. We will also have it available on our Center for Tribes YouTube channel, and we'll send an email out 24 hours after today's webinar to everybody on the webinar or who registered with the link. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them directly in the chat, or there's a little Q&A feature. This is a great way to get our attention as well if there's something that you'd like to ask. And now I'd like you to meet our team. We have been putting together this webinar series for a number of months now, and so it's really exciting to see today as sort of the culmination of a lot of work and energy and effort and intelligence and wisdom and knowledge to put this series together. And so Summer Purdom is joining us from the Capacity Building Center for Tribes, as well as Cheryl Montoya as one of our subject matter experts, Marnie Evans, myself, and then we have Kimberly Kitchener, who is with the Kenaitze Indian Tribe. And also joining us on our call today are Lisa Leonard, David Baker, and Kim Bennett from the Children's Bureau Division of State Systems. And so we appreciate all of their work in putting this webinar together. And also on the call today, we have Melissa McGee from the Center for Tribes helping with tech and supporting this webinar. So thank you all. Okay, we have a couple poll questions that we'd like to ask those of you that are with us today. And so on your screen, a few poll questions are going to come up. And if you could give those a quick answer after we have everybody's responses, we'll stop the poll and share the results. Okay, great. I see some responses coming in. We'll give it just another minute. All right, I'm going to end our poll and share our results. So it looks like we have a number of state and federal support staff with us today. Thank you for being here, as well as administrators, caseworkers, and directors. And um, when we look at how many folks have participated in developing or reviewing a contract before, it looks like about over half, about 70% of folks have participated in that. And then we also asked if you have joined us or watched parts one and two, sorry, of this webinar series. And it looks like the majority of you have also done this. Thank you. If you have not, we encourage you to check those out. We'll share those links in the chat. And so, Summer and Kimberly, I'd like to ask you, why is contract language so important? Let's dive right into this conversation. And if you want to jump into a little bit about your experience with contract language, we'll talk through some of these questions.
So this is Kimberly. I'll start us off. The contract language is really important because I think everybody probably knows that IT caseworkers, directors, maybe your tribal governing council speak different languages sometimes. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful manner, but sometimes literally. So for example, Kanaitsi calls our clients or participants unina. And so we know what that means to us, but our software contractor doesn't understand that. So it's really important that you bring everyone together to understand exactly what it is that you mean by different words, so that you have those clear expectations about what the tribe is going to be responsible for, what is the software development team going to be responsible for, and how everything's going to come together in the end. Because those things, having those set out in the beginning is going to make the process a little less difficult. It's still a huge undertaking, whether you are buying a system for $50,000 or whether you're getting one that's $500,000. It's still a huge task to undertake, but having those things, timelines, and knowing who's doing what and when and what these things mean, timekeeping. Okay, our system has to have timekeeping capabilities. Well, what does that really mean? There's definitely a difference. I know at Kanaitsi, when I said timekeeping and what our software contractor thought timekeeping was. So it's important to have those things and to put things in writing, definitely, because it's very important, again, that everyone kind of stay on the same page. As well, because you will be having meetings with both your team and the software team. And you want to make sure that everything that's being said is communicated clearly. And the best way to do that is to put things in writing. So, and of course, you want to protect your tribe's interest in the data and what they're doing. You're putting a lot of energy into this project, and you don't want someone to walk away with your data or your ideas without making sure that that information is there and decided upon beforehand. So, Summer, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think I just wanted to reinforce the importance of the collaboration, making sure that you bring everybody that's important to the table when developing your contract, so that you can explore all avenues and you don't miss anything. And then the importance of language within a contract and how it needs to be really clear and precise, just to make sure that everybody is understanding of their the expectations, their roles and responsibilities, who's going to manage the data, making sure that the language is concise so that you can reduce any risk to your Indian Child Welfare Program, and also making sure to provide in your data information or in your contract information regarding like the provision, like for data security, who's going to maintain the information, confidentiality, ownership. I think, let's see, in saying that, I believe it's important that data should be clear and precise. I also think that it's important when you're implementing your contract and developing your contract that you provide some sort of provision that allows for flexibility only so that you can accommodate any changes in circumstance within your organization, maybe technology advancements, any sort of regulatory updates, AFCARs, anything that may play into needing to make any amendments to the contract. And then I think just playing on what you said, Kimberly, making sure that the contract protects our tribe's interest. What do we want? And how are we making sure that we are protected and requesting everything that we want and need for our system to run smoothly?
Following up on what Summer said too, having your team review the contract, that's very important. A lot of tribes will have attorneys look at the contract, and that's fine. I encourage that. However, the attorney isn't likely to be using the system. They're probably not an IT expert. They're not a caseworker. They're not a supervisor of caseworkers. They're not really involved in your child welfare system. So while yes, it absolutely is important because the attorney might see loopholes where you didn't even notice them, it's important that someone outside of the legal arena look at the contract and review it and make sure, one, that it makes sense. You know, does everybody understand what it is that this means? And two, that it's really covering everything. And I can say that because I am a licensed attorney and I do review contracts, and I may say like this is missing or that is missing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I understand exactly how the process will work and what it is that's there, or why you may have wanted flexibility in this area and not in this area. So just make sure that your team reviews it and includes that legal aspect of it as well, because you want to make sure that's, again, another reason or another way in which you protect your tribe's interest when negotiating those contracts. And certainly one other thing is, one, do not do anything without a contract, but two, don't just take the contract they're giving you as a foregone conclusion. It is negotiable, and you need to make sure that everything that you need or that you expect is in writing. Here at Kenaitze, our agreement was done prior to my hiring, and is, in my personal opinion, not that of Kenaitze's, a little loosey-goosey. So there's some differences of opinion about what training means or what support means and those kinds of things. So, and unfortunately, the people who entered into that contract, almost all of them, actually all of them, are no longer with Kenaitze. So we can't go back and say, well, director of IT, what did you mean? Or executive director, what did you mean? Because they're not here anymore. So it might be good to, again, those negotiations, maybe keep those in writing as well, kind of documenting that a little bit too. So there's some history that you have that you can look back at.
Kimberly, there was a couple things I wanted to add on. You sparked a thought and I think it refers back to what you originally said, making sure that there's common language in the contract, because it's really important. Like you said, when you give the contract to review to an attorney, they are not generally within the program. And so that programmatic language, those identifying terms that apply to the work that you do within the child welfare system, they may not be clear on what those are. They may just assume that they know the same meaning. But also when writing the contract, I always say forward thinking, like if you're anticipating growth and new positions and new departments within your Indian child welfare program, making sure that you think about those things in writing your contract so that you can make sure and establish those things in writing. So that way, as your program grows, you're not responsible for any unexpected costs that you hadn't discussed before, or, we go back to the licensing agreements, when you get a new data management system, if you plan to, hire 50 people and that's 50 data or that's 50 licensing agreements that you're going to have to pay that you weren't expected to pay. So making sure that those things are in there. And I think going back to that, protecting your tribe's interests is one of the most important things.
Great. I'm hearing a lot about reading the fine print, reading every single line and getting it in front of your whole team as well as the attorneys. So lots of great information there. Thank you both. Our panelists, do you have anything additional that you'd like to add about contract language?
I don't have anything additional. Thank you. I think Summer and Kimberly covered it really well.
Wonderful.
Likewise, I think it was covered really well. I thought what Kimberly said about personnel can basically change over time. And that's part of the reason for the importance of clarity and getting it in writing, even if everybody at the beginning is on the same page. Maybe, you know, a few months or a few years down the road, everybody won't be there.
Absolutely. Yes. Turnover happens every day, and just being prepared for that with your contract. Well, we have a list that we put together of some of the elements that should be included. And so as you can see, it's a pretty lengthy and also not exhaustive list. So these are kind of some of the main core elements of what that we put together. Are there any elements here for our participants that you would like us to really specifically talk about, recognizing that we don't have time to go in depth in each one of these? All right, well, I'm going to open this to our panelists then. Are there any of these elements that you'd like to talk about that you feel are things that might be missed or things that you might have a good best practice for? I open that up.
So, for me, in the position that I'm in, the biggest concern that we have here at Kenight is the statement of work or the scope of work, which kind of encompasses some of the other elements that are listed there. And we talked a little bit before about who's doing what, you know, what is the responsibility of the software developer, what's the responsibility of the tribe staff. But it's more than that. It's also making sure that everybody understands what it is that you want when the process is finished. And that may be a little bit difficult if you, like Kenight, didn't have a database beforehand. We were using Excel. You know, at some point it's like, geez, anything's better than that, right? But you want to kind of think about what it is, what kind of product do you want at the end, and how's that going to work? So what I wrote in the chat was timelines. You know, how long is this expected to take? How many meetings are you going to have? What is the training that's going to be offered? Specifically, how many hours are going to be involved in that? Is there going to be a handbook? For example, with our data system, we were given a handbook. It's like, oh, okay, great. Phew, we don't have to worry about that. Well, we modified our systems. We modified the system so much that the handbook is irrelevant. It doesn't make any sense now because so many things have changed. So whose responsibility is it going to be to update that handbook? Is that on us as the tribe or the staff? Are you going to have meetings? Right now, we're having meetings every week with the data system folks to move the project along. You know, maybe you'll make a list of tasks that you know need to be done. Data conversion or migration is a big one that I've had experience with in the past. When you're trying to, and that refers to data that you're taking from the old system and putting in the new system. How is that going to look? Who's going to do the work? There's a idea of mapping data. So kind of where the data starts in the old system and how you map it and get it into the new system. Who's going to be responsible for that? Is that, you know, your staff? And if it's your staff, who on your staff is going to do that? Is that the IT department? Is that a caseworker? Is that two people together doing that? Or is it the staff at the software developer doing that? Because that's a lot of work. You know, if you have reports, letters, templates, everything that you want to be able to put into this data system, who's going to map all those things? So yes, I want this data out. That's great. Here's a copy of my report. That's a great start. But how do you get the information from the database into the report form? That mapping process is really very important. And I think that it is the more detailed you can get, and then offer a little flexibility at the end in the contract, I think is the best thing to do, because there is a lot of I think a lot of misunderstanding sometimes about what's realistic and what isn't. You know, if every report they're going to charge you, you know, $3,000 to create, that's a lot of money. You know, like how many reports do we have? We have 15 reports. That's a lot, you know. And the tribe, whether you're spending a few thousand or hundreds of $1,000s, that's a lot of money for your tribe, and you don't want to end up with something that you have to say, well, this was a nice try. Let's scrap it and start from scratch. You don't want to have to do that. So definitely that scope of work, talk about it amongst your team, because you all have to be on the same page as well before you contract with the vendor, and understand. And when they say, oh yeah, well, you can modify it all the time, what do those modifications mean? So for example, as I said before, we use the term onina to refer to those who come to us. And if we wanted to say to our data system provider, please, wherever it says client, use the word onina, change that in your data system, I'm fairly confident they would say, no, we're not going to do that. That's a pretty big modification to the bones of the system, and we're not prepared to do that. You know, like those things are important to us. So Summer, I'm sure you have your own thoughts about what it should include.
I agree that the scope of work being one of the most important things in it, and making sure that it is all inclusive in what you're wanting. I also think, you mentioned training and documentation. I think you really need to know the ins and outs of the data system that you are obtaining, because there are some data systems out there where the data management system people themselves will run all of your reports and code the system to do the reporting and make the documents that you need, your case plans. And then there are some data management companies that will train your staff to do that. So knowing which system, what are the scope of the system that you're purchasing, so that you can make sure that that information is in your scope of work. If they're going to provide that training, is it going to be additional cost, or is it, how many hours is that how many, is there going to be follow-up training? If, especially if there is a loss in staff, would they be willing to train, the new staff that come on board? So making sure that you're specific in those things and making sure that your scope of work covers those things is really important. I think data ownership and confidentiality and security is always a big thing. Where is that data going to be housed? Who's going to own that? And I think when we talk about data conversion, migration, and cleaning, oftentimes we focus on this data management system that we're purchasing now and how we're going to migrate and incorporate our existing data into that system, or if we can, or if we're going to start fresh from somewhere, or if we're going to have someone that enters it manually. But also forward thinking, what if down the road you decide to develop a database system of your own through your tribe, or you purchase a new data management system? What are you going to be able to do with that data that's in your system that you're currently purchasing? Who's going to own that? Are you going to be able to transfer it? What's that process going to look like? So making sure that all of that information is clear and concise in your contracts, and making sure that you put everything. And I know we stressed this in the first little topic that we discussed, but making sure that you put everything in writing. If your data management company says, well, we'll provide so many updates a year at no additional cost, that needs to be in your contract, in those exact words, at no additional cost, and how many it will be. And then also thinking on down the road, like terms and conditions. What if what if something changes within the contract? What if something big changes within your department that you need to modify the existing contract. What is that going to look like? Is there going to be contract renewal? Is there going to be, how is that going to be handled within your agency, and who's going to take part in making sure that those things get in there?
And just to follow up with the training, one of the things too is it going to be remote training? Is it going to be in-person training? I can tell you the folks that we're working with are probably not going to come to Alaska to train us, which would be helpful if they could. So that's important. The other thing that we talked about is user acceptance testing. And with that also is what we had was a test site that we could go in and have people practice putting random data in. It wasn't confidential data. So we made up people, like Aaron Rodgers, and, put in stuff about that, and, make up children and Testy McTester and all that kind of stuff, removals and all those kinds of things. Because the sooner that you can get folks at least understanding the basics of how the data system works, the easier it's going to be when you start doing the conversion and people actually start using what we call the live site. So the test site, I think, is also important, and you want to include that in there. Definitely, before you even decide on a vendor, we talked about in one of the last webinars about going through the site and doing a demonstration, of course, but also having that test site where people can just throw stuff in there and see what's going on and how it might work. Because you may find that, boy, we thought this was going to work, but now it's not. How's that, what's going to happen with that now that we find out that the way we thought we should do things isn't going to work? So that's really important. The other thing with regarding reporting and templates and those kinds of things too is what we found is, for example, with AFCARs, and again, that's for Title 4 agencies, the AFCARs reporting is that we submit a report to the feds in the Fed language with the Fed elements and those kinds of things. That's great, wonderful. It's much easier for us to have also a report that spits out what we call an internal AFCARs report that actually gives us data that we can interpret. So it's not, so it's not yes. What does that mean? Yes to whatever, so we created not just a report for AFCARs to be uploaded and sent to the feds, but also an internal report. So the idea that it's one report, but it's kind of sent in two different ways, kind of thinking about those sorts of things. And another thing that Summer mentioned was updates. How many updates are we going to have, and what are those costs and things like that. But what is an update? What's an update look like? So if they release the system and it's database 2.6 and now they've got database 3.0, is that an update? Are other tribes asking for the same things that I'm asking for? And if we all ask for it, does that mean they're going to do it? And it's going to be free of charge? Like, who's going to pay for that? So if every tribe is saying, look, this system that we're all using, the 6 of us say are using the system, and we're all asking for timekeeping capability, and we sort of kind of agree on what that would look like, and it's developed, am I at Kenaitze paying for that and then everybody benefits? Or are we all paying a portion, or is it just being done and then we're all given that as an update? So defining some of those things as well, I think are things to really think about and do. And again, that's why you have your team, because that may not be things that you yourself think of, but issues that maybe the people who do your grants reports think about. We are right now working with the state of Alaska to create a report that would mean that we could send in our data from our data system instead of logging into the state system on a separate computer with separate software and a separate server and doing all those kinds of things. And that wasn't contemplated when we signed the contract, which it probably should have been. I'm not sure why it wasn't, but it wasn't. So that's important. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, hardware requirements and ownership. One of the problems that I ran into in a previous system was folks told us, oh yeah, this is a great, you need to go to this new system and this will be really wonderful and it'll be perfect and it'll be great. all right, so we have decided to go there. Oh yeah, we need to upgrade our servers. No one told us that. Not our IT folks, not anybody. And our IT folks were not internal, they were external. And they were like, oh yeah, of course you have to upgrade your IT, servers. What? I don't know that. I'm an attorney. I didn't go to law school to be a tech person. And so then we had to find extra money because we already had the software, but we couldn't install it because we needed new servers. So again, another reason why that team approach is so important, because you do not want to forget about some of those things, the licenses, how many licenses, all of that. So.
All right. Do our other panelists have anything else to add? Thank you, Kimberly and Summer.
I think maybe just that putting it all in writing, that team approach, absolutely. And then getting it all in writing is really what leads to accountability to help get the outcome in the end. And, everybody can think they understand each other and they all have the same picture of, as Kimberly said, when a contract says this will include reports. Well, how many? Everybody could view, the vendor could view it differently. But having it all in writing, making sure there's that clarity and really looking at the contract to make sure there's not any ambiguity where it could be viewed differently. And as was mentioned, other parties like the legal team looking at the contract who weren't part of the discussions can help bring that out. But at the end of the day, to get the outcome that you need, the statement of work really needs to be fully clear.
And that brings up another point, Kim. So you said accountability, and that is a great, great word to include. The other thing to include, though, is what happens when the person who's supposed to be accountable or the team who's supposed to be accountable doesn't fulfill their obligation. What happens? Do you get a discount? Do you get a free report? I mean, what does that look like? Because that is one of the things that I don't know that our contract really specified. In terms of, okay, well, we have these expectations and that's wonderful, but what happens when those expectations are not met? And you also have to think about how much of your tribe's staff are going to have to put into this. So if you are expecting the software developer to take the contract, do everything, and then come back in 6 months with a final product, that's not going to happen. Your team also has to be available and do certain tasks. We actually have right now a task list with our program developer that says, here's all the tasks that need to be done and who's responsible for it and what the deadline is. And that's separate from our contract. So maybe you might want to include that in your contract, like a system of, how, and who do we contact? Who do we contact when there's an issue with an upgrade or with a contract dispute or what have you? I mean, there are like 4 people at our data provider that we can talk to, but how do we get it moving, when we see an issue, for example? So that is important as well, that accountability, because at your tribe, say, for example, you have 2 people who are working with the developer to get things rolling, and both those people go on a 2-week vacation. Does the software company get to say, oh, well, they're gone for 2 weeks, we can't do anything, we have to wait until, Kimberly and Cheryl get back from their vacations? Or are they, going to be working continuously on these things and someone else can, take the place of those 2 in the meantime, for example, to move things along? So while you're focused on a lot of what the data provider will do, data system provider will do, what is it that realistically you as a tribe can do? Can we dedicate 1 FTE to this project for 12 months? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, that's a decision you all have to make, or maybe you should be thinking about that. Like I said, we meet once a week right now with our data provider. That's usually me and someone from IT who meets with the data provider. Are you able to do that? Are you not able to do that? that certainly would be a question.
I think too, Kimberly, an important thing to make sure that's in your contract is what your day-to-day problems with data, what your data management, everybody can't log in. Are you able to call your data management company and say, hey, we're having trouble logging in, or do you have to go through IT, or what that process looks like? And I think I just want to stress that collaboration piece and that internal collaboration. You're having your team internally, everybody that has eyes on everything and has an especially when you start looking at how many updates can you have, and what's going to consist, what's an update consist of, and if it can only consist of 5 things, what internal team do you look at to say, hey, we're eligible for this update, but we can only update 5 things and we have a list of 10. So prioritizing what that's going to look like, and who, what, if we update this system, it'll ultimately affect this one in a positive way. So maybe that's a change we want to do now. But I also think that external collaboration, when I say external, I mean with our other tribal partners. Like you mentioned, if you have other tribal partners that use the same data management system that you do, and they're currently working through an update, and that's going to have an impact on something that you want to do, that's something that you would want to know. Because if you're working on your update at the same time why both of you pay pay a cost for having the same update when one could write into one and one can write into another? Or like Kimberly said, that cost can be shared. If you get together as a group and say, there's 6 of us that use this same data management system and we need it to do this for us, as a group, maybe that cost can be shared and what that's going to look like. So just making sure that it's specific in your contracts, what those updates are going to, and how often you can have those and what those look like. And so making sure that you maintain that collaboration internally as well as externally, so that what's going on with your data management system outside of just what it's doing for you.
And just as a reminder, we're not mentioning specific data systems only because there's really not that many of them, but 2, it really depends on your needs and, in terms of funding, what you need in terms of the data system at your tribe. Is it just your child welfare department that's going to be using it? Is it your child welfare, your enrollment, your court, etc.? And so for help with that kind of information, really talking to the capacity building center for tribe team, can give you better direction, and they might also know someone else who's using that data system that they can reach out to and say, hey, Kimberly, we have a tribe here that wants to use the same system that Kenites is using. Do you want to talk to them? We've done that before, actually, and we're happy to do that. So I think if you're looking for a specific data system, the name, cost, etc., start with Capacity Building Center for Tribes first, and then hopefully they can connect you. Because talking to other tribes, even in the contract phase, like, hey, what does your contract look like? What did you all do? How is it working for you? Is there something you would have done differently? I will say that, because I've been in multiple data system purchase process, done that multiple times, I have a lot of, I've had experience with it, and so I know some of the good things and the bad things. Fortunately, one thing I did not learn the hard way was about disaster recovery. There was an office in Nebraska. Their office burnt down, like their entire office was smoke damaged and everything else, so nobody could get in. So they didn't even have paper files to rely on for probably a month-ish. And so what they really had to do was rely on their data system. So if the data system hadn't been available to them outside of their physical office, where is the data stored? They would have been in severe, they already had difficulties because, they had no office space, but luckily no one was hurt, which is good. But, their clients or their cases would have severely suffered because of that fact that they didn't have access to their data. Luckily they did. But again, if anybody learned anything from the hurricane in Louisiana, there were people who were like, well, yeah, we have it stored offline, in a facility 5 miles away. Well, if my office in Louisiana is gone, water came, rushed and washed it away, probably my data system where it's being stored is also washed away. So making sure of like not only where it's stored, but the actual like physical location of which state or which area is it stored in, is also very important as well. And those are things we don't always like to think about because, you know, maybe it's never happened before, or we don't want to think about all the negative things, but sometimes it's important to do that. Because you don't want to you don't want to have say, hey, there's no power at our office. We've had that before. There's no power at our office. So how can people still work maybe remotely, and get access to the system? Is that even possible? You know, those kinds of things you definitely want to think about going into this so that you have it defined about where that data is and who has it and how accessible it really is.
Kim, you brought up a really good point when you talk about disaster recovery, and then also when you were talking about how the data is stored, and the language in your contract. And I feel like I come from this privilege of working with larger tribes, and so when I get on these podcasts and I'm trying to provide this information, it comes from a place of I've worked with larger tribes who, you know, we had several people available to look over our contracts. And Kimberly said, hey, maybe you are working with a tribe that you don't have that advantage. So making sure that you pull in those people that you can, but also what she said was reach out to those other tribes and say, hey, what does your contract look like? What's in there? You know, use that to your advantage when developing your contract for your data management system. Reach out to those tribes that you work closely with. You reach out to Capacity Building Center and say, hey, you know, are there some tribes that are using the same data management system? And, you know, reach out to them and say, hey, what'd you put in your contract? Because like Kimberly said, there's a lot of stuff like that disaster, especially disaster recovery, that you don't typically think of when you think about physical storage of your data. I mean, do you want to physically store your data in the same town? So if you do have a tornado or a hurricane that it's wiped out. Like Kimberly said, if my office is wiped out, your office is probably wiped out too, or you're going to store it somewhere else at, you know, miles away that, you know, eliminates that chance of that happening and not being able to access your data at all. And then also even looking at, like Kimberly said, if you're able to access remotely, making sure that that's in your contract, making sure that you can have remote access to your data in the event that these kind of things happen. And what does that remote access look like? Are you going to need something additional on your computers to be able to remotely access it, and knowing ahead of time what those things are and having those in place?
One other quick thought about reporting. So for tribes that are not 4E direct yet, and you're thinking about maybe doing that in the future, you want to include that in your contract, because the AFGAR's reporting and the CB 496 reporting, and you probably are like, what is she talking about? Trust me, once you start the process, you'll understand. But those are very significant reports, and you do not want to get your data system in place and then, you know, even in 2 years say, okay, woohoo, we're finally Title 4E eligible, you know, direct access, and then go, okay, well, now we need all these AFGARS elements in our database, and they say, sure, you can have that, but we need another 10 grand to be able to do that, or $50,000 or whatever, to be able to do that. So if you're thinking about applying for any grant, maybe it's with the state, or you know, doing another program within the tribe, consider those things as well. Additionally, also consider that the reporting requirements that you currently have may change. I am sure we've all had grants and opportunities where we've had to report, even say if we're reporting to our tribal governing board, for example, you know, we have a tribal council. If we're reporting to tribal council every quarter on what's happening, and they say, well, that's all good, but now we need these 3 extra things. And I come back and say, hey, we need these 3 extra things. Is that a new report or is that an amendment? We actually had that conversation with our current provider, because we had a report that that we had to give to the feds from our social services division. And we said, well, it's just an addition. And they said, yeah, no, that's a completely new report. No. So, but we had that back and forth about what that really means. So because our contract would have covered a change, but not a new report. That would have been an extra thing. So you want to think about that in terms of, again, looking forward and what you might be doing, because I'm sure we can all agree that the reporting requirements are going to change, whether it's 6 months from now, a year and a half from now, 5 years from now, it may change. So it's important to keep those kinds of things in mind, as well as payment. I will say too, we've had some discussions about payment. We're not paying you until this thing gets done. Well, no, you should pay us 50% because it's 50% done, or well, no, it's not 50% done, it's only 20% done. Things like that. I mean, it's just important. You don't want to have to negotiate those kinds of things after the contract's signed. So do that going forward. I think at the start, going forward would probably be your best option.
Great. Thank you both for all of that. I have a page of notes about things to look out for. And I think it might be helpful for us to put together some best practices too that we can share out afterwards. I want to encourage folks to reach out to the Center for Tribes, and I did put it in the chat, our email address for technical assistance requests. If you're thinking about a new data system and you want to chat with someone a little bit more, talk about what tribes are using what data systems, we are happy to get you connected and get you the information you need to help you make an informed decision. And I want to ask really quickly, so I see in here we talk about code a few times. So we have source code, malicious code, open source code. Can one of our panelists describe a little bit what this means, and especially thinking about our disaster planning and sort of worst case scenarios, right? Talking through what is malicious code and what can go wrong there.
Hi, were you asking me to address that one or Kimberly?
I think anyone is fine. Kim, if you'd like to, go for it.
Sure. Okay, so malicious code, open source code. Open source code is basically used as a lot of components of software, and malicious code is code that's inserted externally. And there have been threats from what they call malevolent actors out there, maybe other governments or bad people basically, who try and get into systems and who have been able to actually insert active code into systems. And so some of the vulnerable places where that code includes open source software, which is, if you think of software as sort of components built upon components built upon components, then sometimes there's a route of access for malicious code that could do, things that could be really disturbing, like even actually activate and shut down water systems, that kind of thing. So one of the things that can help with that is a software bill of materials. And that is basically like an inventory. So you have this data system, and it includes all these different softwares and levels of softwares, components of components, to ask a vendor to maintain a software bill of materials, which is basically a listing of what are the current revisions, because even those components of components get revised. If you ask them to maintain those, then what that will give the tribe is a much more rapid ability to respond rapidly. Because when a malicious code is identified, then the question becomes, well, is that in our system? And where is it? And if the vendor has agreed to maintain current software bill of materials, then the response to fix it, to implement that fix, will be very fast.
To go one step further from that, Kim's explanation was very good. I won't even pretend to understand all the coding that goes on. However, one step beyond that too is when you need changes made, can your staff make those changes? So for example, do you have access to that code? So for example, here at Kenite, say, for example, we have a drop-down list of tribes that someone can belong to, and we've forgotten a tribe or one gets misspelled or whatever. I can go in to the background and change that spelling or add that tribe or, whatever I need to do, I can do that. If there is a new requirement and we need a whole new drop-down box and all that that I cannot do. So beyond that, like, who has access to those kinds of things? You may have an IT department who's like, whoa, give us this software, give us access, and we'll make the changes and do all the updates and all that kind of thing. Good for you. That's awesome. But are they able to do that for you? Because sometimes changes might need to occur pretty quickly. And other times, they could wait for a provider to do it in the next update.
Fantastic. Great point. So really thinking about exercising sovereignty throughout the process of contracting, and being able to advocate and recognizing that a contract is negotiable and that what is presented to you can be and should be representative of what your tribe needs and your tribe's program. Well, thank you both so much, and thank our panelists for sharing as well. We are just about at the top of the hour. I want to let folks know that our entire webinar series is available on YouTube, and this recording will be available shortly after we wrap up today. We have a number of resources that we also put together for folks, and I'm going to throw those in the chat real quick. These resources were put together by our team. If they are helpful to you, we hope they are helpful to you in thinking about data systems. And we encourage you again, please reach out to us or the Center for Tribes. And we'll be sharing all of our individual contact information in just one slide. But first, we do have an evaluation for today's webinar. If you could please complete our evaluation, there is a QR code on the screen. You can scan it with your phone if you want to take a quick survey there, or it will automatically pop up as you exit the webinar today. So you'll have an opportunity to answer a few short questions and let us know what you thought and what you'd like to see more of. And with that, I thank you all for coming today. Here's our contact information for myself, each of our panelists, and I thank you very much for joining us. We have a few moments and we'll stay on. If there's any questions, you can put those in the chat, or there's a feature to raise your hand so we can take you off mute. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today and have a great rest of your Wednesday.